So I finished right on 11, gives me 1 hour for questions. I might ask Nick if he'll be a spotter for me, and we'll get straight into it.
And if I could ask 2 questions of you, which is, firstly, wait till the microphone comes to you before you ask a question. Secondly, if you feel comfortable to do so, if you can say who you are and where you're from, that would also assist me, particularly for the purpose of those who will watch the video at some later stage. So, are there any questions?
Thanks, David. Tom Wilson from the Summer Foundation. So our work is running around people with people already in nursing homes, trying to find solutions for those, as you know. I guess the question I really want to ask was specifically around the brain injury area. And the question really is around the health interface with disability, which has always been, as you mentioned before, has been a bit of a challenge for us all along. But I think one of the cultural questions in disability has always been that it's largely informed by a developmental disability framework, and that has a historic suspicion of over-medicalising the disability system. Whereas I think in the ABI world, it's clear that a partnership between the health system and disability is required, and it requires the disability system to have a framework around restoration. It can't be called rehabilitation, I know, because that in the NDIS's world is referring only to medical systems, not to disability systems. But I guess the challenge ahead of us is how do we provide the sorts of ongoing supports for people with complex brain injuries in particular, which requires a rehabilitative or a restorative type of framework when there's a culture that sits around it of suspicion of too medicalising of the world that we're working in.
Thanks, Tom. Good question. I sort of have a vision for this scheme with interfaces. We'll see whether or not I can bring it to fruition. Invariably, when you have 2 government service systems that bump up against each other, the tendency is to bring a great big thick black texter and draw a line down the middle and say, well, we'll do that and you do that, and this is all about avoiding cost shifting, and usually that big thick line creates gaps in the middle, and we know that occurs in many of the health community related systems. My preference is, and I think it might be a vision that is not delivered while I'm under my stewardship, but we'll start the framework now, is to have the service systems work together with each other to deliver person-centred responses. Now, signs are good in some areas. In Victoria, in our trial site in Bowen, from this year, we've worked very hard with the education department, and children in our scheme, as they come back to have their plan renewed, are getting a single plan that covers their NDIS supports and their education supports. And there's a commitment from the health department down there to extend for children who have chronic health needs associated with their disability, to include that and to extend that to child protection. So it's sort of a model that I would like to see brought back into those other interface areas as well. Probably 12, 15 months ago, I met with the executives of New South Wales Health, and part of the discussion there, and you know, that was a good discussion, was to try and see how we can work together, not to bump into each other, because the reality is that the delivery of the NDIS will be enormously beneficial to the health system. As you would know, people with disability are significantly overrepresented in the health system because of the lack of community support leads to to development of chronic health conditions, and the use of hospital systems really as last resort options often creates bed blocks. So that's a general approach of cooperation between different service systems which I'd like to see come in. In the brain injury area, yes, this issue of continuing restoration in the community is an appropriate one, and it is something that the NDIA will look at in terms of long-term types of programs. I know myself from my prior days at Lifetime Care and Motor Accidents Authority, where we funded quite a lot of the work of Robin Tate, that brain injury does have continued recovery over many years, and that needs appropriate supports in the community. We haven't initiated any brain injury specific programs yet, but we have as I mentioned, we're doing work around challenging behaviours, and that's a facility-based program we've initiated in Bowen around building interventions to assist the person over quite often long periods of time to be able to live more independently at the community level rather than in but segregated from the community. So I think the options for the NDIS to have partnership arrangements with health for slow recovery programs would be ones that we should be pursuing as well. One of the benefits from the NDIS is that the logic of the funding understands that by spending upfront to increase independence, increase functionality, increase the ability of a person to participate pays off downstream, and it pays off both on our own balance sheet in reduced costs of care and support over time, but it also pays off generally across both Commonwealth and state budgets in terms of reducing reliance upon disability pensions and carers' pensions and carer allowances, and in reduced costs in the health system would be one. We have to be able to document that, and so the concept of investment in rather than just passive care is one that's very strong and central to our mind.
Yes, Stephen Scott. I'm the father of Robert, and he beside me, and I'm going to be living the scheme that we're putting together, so thank you for that. Mr. Bowen, and it seems that from all the bad luck we've had, my good luck that we're in the situation we are in time, even though it may be 2019 before you full rollout. I'd just like to preface my question, if I could, by just saying how lucky we are to be part of a facility like this, and thank Jim Towers for inviting me along today, and Robert, and acknowledge the distinguished guests here, and appreciate being able to get a little bit of an insight into something that I really know very little about. My question, and you've answered a lot of my question in bits and pieces in your address and that first question, but Robert has sustained a traumatic brain injury and will be here for a considerable time. How long will depend on a lot of factors. And there's so many questions I could ask. Probably the one that is most pressing for us at the moment is that Robert's turning 27 this year. It's very likely he will need a very high level of care for the rest of his life. And we've got this new scheme coming in, which of course we will be living for the rest of my life as well. My question is, how much of the fabric of this scheme is designed around accommodation for people like Robert? Being a young person who loves to have people around him, and that residential situation that he's in is going to contribute so much to his long-term recovery, and make more, I guess, use of all the extensions that the National Disability Scheme is going to provide.
Well, thanks, Peter, and g'day, Robert. So accommodation is undoubtedly, in the top, if not the top list of issues that are identified as a need. Perhaps one of the best indicators is that there are 6,500 people below the age of 60 living in residential aged care in Australia because of the lack of suitable accommodation in the community. And that's why last week, as of Friday, the Minister was able to announce that he's asked the NDIS to develop some trials for more accommodation. It's been very important to us to settle some of the critical policy issues, because if we don't, the tendency will be just to continue to build what's already there, which is supported accommodation, congruent care places where people are slotted in and everyone's grateful because they're in desperate need of getting a bed in a house, and that becomes the model. We're quite focused on making sure that we build people a home, not just a house to live in. And that's why the approach will be to pick up what we've seen work well and build that into the models in the future. So sure, there will be some shared house arrangements. Young people share houses anyway, appropriate they do that, but they should be able to choose who they live with. It should be a home in which other people can come in as their guests at any time, not be first and foremost a workplace, which is one of the severe limitations of the current models. We've seen some great stuff be developed in Australia over the last 10 years. Summer Foundation, who was mentioned, have done some great work in this area. And we've seen the growth of things like intentional communities, so created communities around a few people with disability that are in circumstances where they're living with other people. So it's not a disability ghetto, if you like, or it's not a house that's just supposed to be in the community, but in which there's no engagement with anyone outside of that house, and the only person other than family who sees is paid care workers. So this will be a really great opportunity for us to test some of those models, get them out there, and I'll give you a card before I leave, and if you email me, I'll send you details on many exciting things that people have done all around Australia, mostly family initiated, I might say, at the moment, but the test for the agency is to take those initiatives and build them into the structure of what we do going forward.